Let's go ahead and pray. Almighty God, we thank you for the changing of the seasons and for the beauty of this day, for this time and this space in which to gather and to share with each other in study and in praise of you, O God. We pray that you would draw us closer together as we learn more about you, your servant David, and the history of your people, and that you would open our hearts and our minds as we share with one another. May your Holy Spirit move in and among us that are gathered, both in person and online. And may everything we say and do be to the glory of you. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So, last week we had chapter 20, David and Jonathan, where David flees from Saul permanently from his place at Saul's court. So now David is going to go into permanent exile here until things change. So our first section in chapter 21, we're in chapters 21 and 22 tonight. And again, we may finish early, we may not. That all depends on you guys. So, but our first section here is going to be verses 1 through 9 in chapter 21. This is David coming to the priest Ahimelech at Nob. Who would like to read for us? Verses.
He's one of our big talkers tonight.
I know. You'd have to fill his shoes. So verses verses 1 through 9, and who would like to read for us?
That's my pen. Thank you.
Anyone like to read?
I will. I will. Then David, then came should I go?
Go ahead.
All right. Then came David to Nob to Ahimelech the priest, and Ahimelech was afraid at the meeting of David, and said unto him, Why art thou alone, and no man with thee? And David said unto Ahimelech the priest, The king hath commanded me a business, and hath said unto me, Let no man know anything of the business whereabout I send thee, and what I have commanded thee. And I have appointed my servants to such and such a place. Now therefore, what is under thine hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread in my hand, or what there is present. And the priest answered David and said, Well, there is no common bread under my hand, but there is hallowed bread, if the young men have kept themselves at least from women. And David answered the priest and said unto him, Of a truth, women have been kept from us about these 3 days, since I came out. And the vessels of the young men are holy, and the bread is in a manner common, yea, though it were sanctified this day in the vessel. So the priest gave him hallowed bread, for there was no bread there but the shewbread that was taken from before the Lord, to put hot bread in the day when it was taken away. Now a certain man of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord, and his name was Doeg the Edomite, the chiefest of the herdmen that belonged to Saul. And David said unto Ahimelech, And is there not there under thine hand a spear or sword? For I have neither brought my sword nor my weapons with me, because the king's business required haste. And the priest said, The sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom thou slewest in the valley of Elah, behold, it is here wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If thou wilt take that, take it, and there is no other save that here. And David said, There is none like that, give it me.
Thank you. Okay. Right. So David flees to Nob, to the priest Ahimelech, who is a descendant of Eli. You remember from earlier in the book, Eli. And so we have this curious story here, bread. And then the sword of Goliath that ends up with David. So questions or comments on verses 1 through 9?
Well, David liked by why he was there.
Yeah. I picked up on that too, especially last week when we talked about, lying for expediency or for, to protect yourself or somebody else. And that's gonna, I don't know, I kind of noticed that does have an impact later on, the fact that he lies here.
There was the business about the bread, which I understand. They gave the old bread, I guess, to the priests to use, but once it came in their hands, it was deemed to be holy bread.
Mhm.
And so we had to get a dispensation, I guess, to use that.
Yeah, Hemlock wants to make sure that David and his men are properly sanctified and holy in order to eat this bread, because it is a holy bread. It's the bread of the presence.
I was confused because it said, "Why art thou alone, and no man with thee?" And then it said that he's got men, and then they were 3 days holy.
Mm-hmm.
Did I miss something there?
Because he's gonna meet his man at a certain place.
Yeah, he said that they weren't with him. Now he's lying here when he says the king has charged me with a matter that nobody needs to know about. And he says, I'm going to meet, as for my men, I've told them to meet me at a certain place. And so, but I'm under the impression here that David is alone at this point. And
But
it's
he says
later
he's-
that
But he
he
says he's
gathers
got
people
men.
to him.
Yeah, but he says he's got men, I guess.
It may be that he has a few people with him. But he was alone, as far as I know, when he left Jonathan. So he, the priest is probably a little bit, since David or anyone else important would have frequently traveled with an entourage, the priest is probably wondering, okay, where's the rest of your men? And so then David's having to lie about it and say, the king sent me my men, I'm meeting them somewhere else. But he has a couple of needs that Ahimelech is able to fulfill for him. He's hungry. And he doesn't have a weapon.
No, he left in such a hurry.
Mm-hmm. So the bread here is the bread of the presence, which was 12 loaves baked from pure wheat flour and placed before Yahweh on each Sabbath. And yeah, according to Exodus and Leviticus, such bread was to be eaten by Aaron and his sons, that is, the priests. And so Ahimelech is willing to give this bread to David, but only if he has met the conditions of ritual holiness, which specifically here involves not having relations with women for a certain time period. So Jesus
Talks about the king's mission being urgent. Yeah, it was urgent to get up and flee with your life. Yeah. I guess that could be considered the king's mission. He's after me.
So interestingly, Jesus refers to this story. It's found in all three of the synoptic gospels. Here it is in Luke, chapter 6. Starting at the beginning of chapter 6 in Luke. One Sabbath, while Jesus was going through the grain fields, his disciples plucked some heads of grain, rubbed them in their hands, and ate them. But some of the Pharisees said, "Why are you doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" Jesus answered, "Have you not read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God and took and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for any but the priest to eat, and gave some to his companions." And then he said to them, "The Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath." So he's sort of using this story saying, look, David was hungry. Here, Jesus assumes he has companions. David was hungry, even though he wasn't supposed to eat the bread of the presence. He needed it.
Well, we don't know how many days he'd gone without food at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Although I read someplace that where he went to Ahimelech versus where Saul was only like 3 miles apart.
Yeah, it's not very far on the map I have here.
But he was fleeing, so he wanted a supply.
True.
But
He needed provisions.
yes,
He needed provisions and he needed a sword. Right? It's not really said how Goliath's sword made it to Nob. Why it was there. If you look at chapter 17, it just says that he put the armor in the tent, took the head to Jerusalem, but then he kept carrying the head with him to, to Saul's court. So,
Where does it say that? It's not in this chapter, is it?
in chapter 17, at the end, in chapter 17, verse 54,
Oh,
it said, David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. There's nothing to say what happened to the sword.
Now we know.
pictures of that in Sunday school used to always gross me out.
It carried the head.
Yes.
They have pictures of him carrying the head in your
Yeah.
Sunday school?
Oh, yeah.
Mine didn't.
Yeah.
You didn't either.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they have a picture of this sword and, yeah. Maybe that was just New Jersey, I don't know. I live there.
Well, the priest Ahimelech is very willing to help David. You know, as we'll read later on, he had no reason to believe that David, you know, was there under any other pretense. And then what he said he was. Pretty straightforward chapter, right? Any other comments or questions on this section? Keep in mind that Doeg, the Edomite, is there. And it doesn't tell us why he was detained before the Lord. It just says he's there detained. So we can only speculate.
He's connected to Saul.
He's the chief of Saul's shepherds, is what my
So
text says.
wouldn't he have known that David was lying? Maybe he didn't
Probably.
hear the conversation though either.
Yeah, or was not able to insert himself into the conversation.
Maybe he wasn't back there at the time that Saul was after David. and
Maybe
he
the
didn't
sheep,
know about it.
sheep were further out and he wasn't back there.
Yeah, he didn't know about what was going on.
All we know is that he was there, he saw David there, he saw Ahimelech help David.
Yeah,
That's
which
gonna,
becomes a problem for him like later.
that's gonna be important later in the story, yeah. Well, then we follow that up with this very strange story
Yes.
of David and King Achish of Gath. So who would like to finish out the chapter then for us? It's very short.
That day David fled from Saul and went to Achish, king of Gath. But the servants of Achish said to him, "Isn't this David the king of the land? Isn't he the one who they sang about in their dances? Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands." David took these words to heart and was very much afraid of Achish, king of Gath. So he pretended to be insane in their presence. While he was in their hands, he acted like a madman, making marks on the doors of the gate and letting saliva run down his beard. Achish said to the servants, "Look at, he is insane. Why bring him to me? Am I so short of madmen that you have to bring me carry this in front of me? Lest this man come into my house." That's him.
All right, thank you. What's going on here?
David's still trying to hide, I guess, who he is.
Hmm. It's a strange story, but there's a couple important things here to pull out. David is going to a Philistine king. So Gath is the Philistines' territory. And, you know, he's obviously thinking that he can go there to lay low, right, from Saul. But the servants of Achish, of the king, say, "Isn't this David, the king of the land?" Now, quick question for you all. Is David the king of the land at
Not
this
yet.
point? No.
No.
So
But how did they know? that
why
he'd
did the
been anointed
servants,
already?
why did the servants of Achish say that? Well, did they not sing to one another, "Saul has killed his thousands, David his 10,000s"?
We've heard that song before.
Mhm.
So this is the king of a foreign power recognizing that David is the king of Israel. Or calling David the king of Israel, even though he isn't. So now we've had Samuel's anointed him. Michael's affirmed him. Jonathan has affirmed his kingship. The people generally have affirmed his kingship, and now we have a Philistine king, a foreign dignitary, affirming David's kingship. So we're starting to see all of these others fall in line behind David, the king, even the Philistines, even the foreigners.
Well, Achish doesn't say it, the servants say. it.
Right, the servants say it, but David, but Achish, listens to his servants, and then it's kind of implied. David then becomes afraid that, right, if he thinks I'm the king, I can't go to him because that's going to be a dangerous situation for me. He was thinking he could just anonymously hide, maybe sell himself out as a mercenary, which he does do later. He sells himself out as a mercenary to the Philistines. but he's thinking that maybe he can do this. And, but no, he's recognized. So in order to disguise himself after being recognized, he decides to play the madman. Great. So my commentary says there's a little bit of an Israelite dig at the Philistines here. By having Achish say, "Do I lack madmen?" You know, it's kind of like the Israelites saying, "Oh, the Philistine courts is just, they're, look at all those madmen over there. They're full of them."
So a footnote in my Bible says here, David then protected himself by acting insane because it was the custom not to harm mentally unstable people.
Thank goodness.
Well, it's a good custom to have.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It is.
One commentary said that, he had spittle on his beard. And apparently that was very disgraceful among the Israelites to have spittle on your beard, you know. So there you go. We've got another factoid.
Well, you know, this is God's chosen king.
Yeah.
And he comes from a low family. He's the last in the line of the family. And here he is, you know, being portrayed as this incredibly ostracized individual, I guess, you know, like you said, disgraceful individual. And so one of the other things my commentary said was, to the nations, God's anointed one seems a harmless madman. To proclaim a crucified criminal as God's anointed one must have seemed equally mad to the nations in Jesus's time. I think it's just, you know, it's a weird story, but it's another reminder that God continues to choose the ones that we might not initially choose. I mean, think of it, if somebody came walking in the door with spittle on their beard, talking to themselves and everything, how would we treat that person coming into the doors of the church?
Think they're home.
Very calmly, be calm and kind. What a situation we have right here with Kathy and Chuck. I think we're all very hospitable to them and just accept that they may yell out during the service and just go on with it.
Yeah.
They can't help that, and we all realize that.
Well, it's very harmless.
Right.
That's very true. It's very true. I think it can be hard for us not to think, you know, when somebody first comes in, being loud, you know, or looking disheveled, or, you know, it can be hard for us not to think, you know, we want to be loving, we want to be hospitable, but I think it can be hard for us not to think less of them, or that, you know, I don't know. Whereas certainly we wouldn't think, here comes God's anointed walking into the church, but maybe we ought to think that more, because this is exactly what's happening.
Well, we're past the day where everybody's all dressed up.
That's true.
Wearing their Sunday best. So that helps those type of people not to stand out as much.
You know, you talk about Chuck and Kathy, we just recognized her this past Sunday
And they
for
were-
making I know. So it's staff, we signed a special card for her to send to her, but for making all of the hats, you know, she knits all those hats and donates them to give out with the coats to the children on our brown bag lunch route. She makes hundreds of hats.
She does. We had some of those left, and what were left, then they sent to place, the Sparrow House.
That's good. Yeah. This is the folks where sometimes the gentleman will yell out Dr. Pepper in the service. I don't know if you.
Or various things.
Various
He
things.
talks to Mevin a lot from.
Yeah.
from the sea.
Yeah,
He sure likes Dr. Pepper.
he does.
And Mevin has told me Kathy texts her daily, sometimes several times a day.
And some people get upset with them interrupting and others, most of, I think everybody's used to it, just let it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had.
They mean no harm.
First time I heard it, I just thought Mevin had put a plan out there. He's kind of roll with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know some people can find it disruptive, but I, and I sometimes, certainly at the beginning was a little self-conscious about it, being somebody who's partially in charge of worship, but, I really do think, I love that they feel comfortable here and are able to come and worship with us, and share their gifts.
They were afraid at one point that they would have to leave when they were having to move.
Mhm.
Their sister still breaks them.
By the, this church. Somebody came in. Or actually. Went down and sat in the front row, and that's a red flag. And then he started spinning the hymnal on his finger. My brother-in-law was like an usher that day, and the pastor came in, said, sit, signal for him to be close by. And, they did have to escort him out when he set his bulb on fire.
Oh, yeah.
So, when there's a safety issue, then,
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Mhm.
Sometimes people complain about the making noise and,
I've never heard any
I think-
complaints.
yeah, I have, and I just say, look, it takes all kinds and.
They're in church. And they're listening, they're listening because they comment
They
sometimes.
respond, yeah. Yeah. Hey, sometimes getting a response makes it easier for us preachers to,
Mhm.
Know where they're coming from.
yeah. Well, after David leaves, Gath, he goes to the cave of Adullam. And he begins to gather an entourage. So let's read about that. Again, it's a short reading, verses 1-5 of chapter 22. And who would read that for us?
David departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. And when his brothers and all of his father's house heard it, they went down there to him. And everyone who was in distress, and everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was discontented gathered to him, and he became captain over them. And there were with him about 400 men. And David went from there to Mizpah of Moab. And he said to the king of Moab, "Pray let my father and my mother stay with you, till I know what God will do for me." And he left them with the king of, Moab. And they stayed with him all the time that David was in the stronghold. Then the prophet Gad said to David, "Do not remain in the stronghold, depart and go into the land of Judah." So David departed and went into the forest of Hereth.
Thank you. So another short passage, but a lot going on here. So what stands out to you? What strikes you about this passage here?
Well, his whole family had joined him there.
Yeah.
And he was obviously concerned that they would come to harm in the middle of this problem he was having with Saul.
Mm-hmm.
Would have been a logical thing to be worried about.
It sounds like a whole lot of people that were having serious needs filtered into this picture at this time, thinking they would get support and help. That's pretty positive, actually. People in distress need help for sure.
Everyone who was in distress, everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was discontented gathered to him. So sounds like yeah. Saul maybe doesn't have quite as good a grip on his kingdom as he thinks.
Well, it's also sounds like, Jesus went to the, he didn't go to the top of the society.
No,
He came
Help
for
the
those who were in
helpless.
trouble.
yeah.
And David was hiding in a cave. And these people came to him,
Mm-hmm.
saw him as their leader.
Mm-hmm.
This is the first time we've had mention of his mother.
Mhm.
It is.
My commentary, says that the prophet Gad, that the king designate is now served also by a prophet.
Yeah. Yeah, so now there's a prophet even that recognizes, yeah, David. Which, we might have said that Samuel and the others there at Ramah were prophets, but this is a named prophet. Samuel was more of a judge, I guess. So, yeah. Another thing to remember is that David's great grandmother was a Moabite. Ruth. Ruth was a Moabite, and Ruth was the mother of Obed, who was the father of Jesse, who's the father of David. So in taking his dad and his mom to Moab, it's almost like he's taking them back to his great-great-grandmother's side of the family to take care of them. And I was impressed that the king of Moab allowed them to stay.
Well, maybe he knew of the family,
He might have.
since the family was from Moab.
That could be why David decided to take them there.
Mhm.
So my commentary has a note here. It says, I am certain that those gathering to David did not look in his time like a formula designed for success. Certainly, the representatives of institutional religion in Jesus's time did not think he was making wise choices about those who became associated with him. But if David and Jesus drew the troubled and the outcast to themselves because they offered hope and new life to all, can the church in our time do less and still serve the kingdom of God? Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. And then one more thing was in verse 3. David says, let my father and mother come to you until I know what God will do for me. So there again, it's just the reminder that David is wholly reliant on God and trusts that God is going to carry him into the future. He doesn't know what that looks like, but he's leaning on God for his future.
Yours said what God will do for me,
Mm-hmm.
and so did Ed's. Mine says what God will do to me.
Mm.
Ooh,
Mm.
Mine said for. Interesting.
that's entirely different.
Yeah,
I think the Hebrew preposition is the same word.
Oh.
It's been a long time since I've done Hebrew, but I'm pretty sure.
First it was hot.
I think it's yeah. I think 4 is the same. Yeah. Yeah, so it's just the Hebrew letter L that's put on the beginning of a word, which can mean like 2 or 4. Or,
Okay.
Yeah. Toward, upon.
But in our translation, that 2 different meanings.
It does, yes. It does. I think it does have the connotation though of, what God's going to do with regard to David's future.
Yeah.
So. All right, well, now we come to the really interesting part of tonight's reading. And that's gonna be the end of chapter 22. So this one's a little bit longer. Would anybody like to read for us?
All the way to the end?
All the way to the end.
Okay, I'll do it. Saul learned that David and his soldiers had been located. Saul was sitting under the tamarisk tree on the hill at Gibeah, spear in hand with all his servants waiting on him. He said to them, "Listen up, Benjamites. Will Jesse's son give fields and vineyards to each and every one of you? Will he make each and one of you commanders of units of 1,000 men or commanders of units of 100? Is that why all of you have conspired against me? No one informed me when my son made a covenant with Jesse's son. Not one of you is concerned about me or informs me when my own son sets my servant against me in an ambush. But that's what has happened today." Doeg the Edomite, who was standing with Saul's servants, responded, "I saw Jesse's son go to Ahimelech, Ahitub's son of Adnab. Ahimelech questioned the Lord for David and gave him provisions as well as the sword of Goliath the Philistine. The king then sent for the priest of Ahimelech, Ahitub,
52, yeah.
son, and all his extended family who were the priests at Nob. All of them came to the king. "Listen here, son of Ahitub," Saul said. "Yes, sir," he replied. Saul said to him, "Why have you conspired against me, you with Jesse's son, giving him food and a sword and questioning God for him so that he is now against me, waiting in ambush, which is what has happened today?" Ahimelech answered the king, "Out of all your servants, who is as trustworthy as David, he is the king's son-in-law, does whatever you ask, and is well respected in your house. Was that the first time I questioned God for him? Of course not. But please, the king shouldn't accuse me, his servant, or anyone in my father's household of any wrongdoing, because your servant knew nothing whatsoever about this matter." But the king said, "You will be executed, Ahimelech, you and all your father's household." The king ordered the guards waiting on him, "Go ahead and kill the Lord's priests because they've joined up with David too. They knew he was on the run, but didn't inform me." But the king's servants were unwilling to lift a hand to attack the Lord's priests. The king then ordered Doeg, you go attack the priests." So Doeg the Edomite went and attacked the priests, killing 85 men who wore the linen priestly vest that day. He put the whole priestly city of Nob to the sword, men and women, children and infants, even oxen, donkeys, and sheep. But one of the sons of Ahimelech, Ahitub's son, escaped. His name was Abiathar, and he fled to David. Abiathar reported to David that Saul had slaughtered the Lord's priests. David told Abiathar that day when Doeg the Edomite was there. I knew that he would tell Saul everything. I am to blame for the deaths in your father's family. Stay with me and don't be afraid. The one who seeks my life now seeks yours too, but you'll be safe with me.
Oh, man. That's a heavy story.
It is.
Saul just keeps digging a deeper grave for himself.
Yeah. The fact that even his servants wouldn't, they knew it was wrong. They wouldn't do it.
Right. Right.
He had to turn to Doeg, the Edomite, who couldn't care less that these were priests
Right.
of the Lord. Saul has completely lost the plot, as we say.
But killed all the children,
Oh,
the
horrible.
animals, everybody.
And Ahimelech actually lays out that David is in your house, he's your servant,
Yeah.
your
Your son-in-law.
son-in-law.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought his defense was very reasonable.
Exactly.
How was I supposed to know that you had any sort of ill will towards David? You know, everybody knows he's your most faithful servant.
And captain over your bodyguard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
David was apparently the captain over Saul's bodyguard.
yeah.
This Doeg. Does he have, I mean, does he have men? I mean, how could one person kill 85 men and all that stuff? Children.
Well, I mean, Jonathan and his armor bearer ran up and killed 20 soldiers all by themselves like that.
No,
I don't
God was doing that.
I'm not sure priests were the fighting type.
Probably
If they
not.
start killing their kids, you think they would be.
Maybe they did the children last.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know.
Then the oxen, asses, and sheep to the sword.
You know, what's really,
And the horse you rode in on, right?
you know, what's really, you know, I don't know a better word for it than damning about that is that the whole reason Saul was rejected in the first place is he refused to do this to the Amalekites. He did not institute the ban against the Amalekites, and now he's doing it to the priestly city, the priests of the Lord.
You know, which my notes say, which was supposed to be used only in cases of idolatry and rebellion against God. But it was Saul, not the priest, who had rebelled against God. And this action shows how mental and emotional, and Saul's action showed his mental and emotional instability, how far he had strayed from God.
Well, he's become so paranoid too. He thinks everybody's against him.
Says here, and Terry, it says, thus the prophecy of judgment against the house of Eli is fulfilled.
Yeah, so that was the other thing about this passage. So if we go back to chapter 2, if we remember all the way back to chapter 2,
His sons were despicable.
the man of God that came to Eli, and said to him, Therefore, the Lord of the God of Israel declares, this is in verse 30 of chapter 2. I promised that your family and the family of your ancestors should go in and out before me forever. But now the Lord declares, far be it from me, for those who honor me I will honor, and those who despise me shall be treated with contempt. See, a time is coming when I will cut off your strength and the strength of your ancestors' family, so that no one in your family will live to old age. Then in distress you will look with greedy eye on all the prosperity that shall be bestowed upon Israel, and no one in your family shall ever live to old age. The only one of you whom I shall not cut off from my altar shall be spared to weep out his eyes and grieve his heart. All the members of your household shall die by the sword.
The doom of the house of Eli.
Yeah.
So the only one that's spared is Abiathar, or however you say his name.
It sounds like, you know, God wanted this to happen.
That's an interesting question. We could spend the rest of the time talking about that. We could spend the rest of the time talking about that, but my short answer is no, I don't think God wanted this to happen. It's possible that God saw it coming. But it's also possible, entirely possible, that this happened, and then as they were writing the story, they wrote in the prophecy to explain why it happened. I don't know. It's different ways of looking at it.
You know, again, my notes have interest saying, why did God allow 85 innocent priests to be killed? Their deaths served to dramatize to the nation how a king could become an evil tyrant. Where were Saul's advisors? Where were the elders of Israel? Sometimes God allows evil to develop to teach us not to let evil systems flourish. Serving God is not a ticket to wealth, success, or health. God does not promise to protect good people from evil in this world, but he does promise that ultimately all evil will be abolished. Those who have remained faithful through their trials will experience great rewards in the age to come.
The commentary here, it said the barbarous atrocities perpetrated against the city now seem to have been designed to terrify all the subjects of Saul from affording either aid or an asylum to David. But they proved ruinous to Saul's own interests as they alienated the priesthood and disgusted all good men in the kingdom.
Backfiring on him.
There was a message there already.
When the priesthood, Ahimelech, and his household are still loyal to Saul at this point. He legitimately didn't know that David had been exiled basically from Saul's court. And so he thought he was still serving Saul by serving David. And so they were on Saul's side, and Saul is rapidly losing allies. So the fact that he did this to cut off the priests, just kind of shooting himself in the foot there. But it's because he's become so paranoid that he thinks everybody is out there. Really, the first Samuel could be called just the descent of Saul. Because he really just descends into his own madness and his own paranoia. Because he just can't let go of his power, his throne. And you know, he says, well, even my own son is conspiring with David against me. And it's like, oh, Jonathan helped David escape from you. But at this point, David is not, nobody is trying to kill Saul. To this point, nobody is trying to kill Saul. David is not trying to kill Saul. We're about to get a couple chapters next week where we'll see David is not trying to kill Saul, even after all of this. But Saul is still so paranoid that he thinks they're all coming after him. That it's just like what your commentary says. He's alienating everybody from him. Have you ever, I mean, this is not necessarily uncommon today either. We see people do this. So if you've ever known anybody that this has happened to, that's behaved this way, or I think it's sad to see.
Makes me think about some of the politics today, like when a politician might feel they're losing their power and they feel threatened.
Hmm.
European history, or well, just history in general, the kings, often when kings were crowned, they killed all their siblings.
Hmm.
You know, because they
Mhm.
were, you know, afraid they were gonna get poisoned.
Right.
You know, so imagine there are countries still doing that kind of crazy stuff.
I'm seeing in the business world, manager has a subordinate that starts doing really great work, and that person's boss sees how good they're doing, and so this manager starts taking credit for their underlings' work
Hmm.
and throws them under the bus, right?
That
And,
happens a lot.
So,
Is there anything else in these two chapters that we have questions about, or? Thoughts?
It's, in my commentary. It's that it's prophet of Gad. He later assisted David with musical arrangements.
Hmm.
Temple services.
Mine says, David acknowledges his own role in the tragic business, thus demonstrating a sense of justice and compassion that Saul solely lacked.
Mhm. Yeah, that was the other thing I wanted to make sure we pulled out. David accepts responsibility. I am responsible. Which, you know, I kind of did feel a certain way about David because he had lied to Ahimelech about why he was there, and because he lied, if he had told the truth, would Ahimelech have helped him? You know. So David needed the help, so that's why he lied.
Right.
But if he had told the truth, would Ahimelech have helped him, and then would this tragedy have taken place? I mean, honestly, the fault is with Saul, clearly.
And,
But
and David may not have survived. He hadn't had help.
He was,
So, you know, it's a hard story.
It was, what do they call it, deniability.
Yeah,
Plausible deniability, yeah.
You know, if he could say, well, I didn't know that this was, you know, and if David had told him what was really happening, then it was putting him more at risk if he helped him.
Well, Ahimelech would have still been in trouble if he didn't send somebody to tell Saul, hey, David's over here in Nob. Or Nob, or whatever it is.
Yeah, he also probably thought he would get in trouble if he didn't help David,
Right.
because David is the king's servant.
That's all he knew of that.
Can't win for losing. So, yeah,
Servant and
gave him
son-in-law.
a sword.
so he, and that's exactly the plausible deniability. That's exactly what he uses as his defense. Yeah. So clearly the fault is squarely with Saul, but I gotta respect David for taking responsibility. He says, I am responsible. I saw Doeg there. I knew what was up. I knew that he was gonna say something. It's my fault.
Yeah.
And I think that's really the mark of a really great leader. That even when something isn't actually their fault, they say, the buck stops with me. It's my fault. I take responsibility.
But Doeg could have spoken up and said, no, Ahimelech did not know that David was fleeing.
Oh yeah,
He
no,
didn't.
oh yeah, no, Doeg is equally as culpable. Yeah, Doeg is not
I'm
great.
saying zone hairs.
He's, you know, he reminds me of, I don't know how many of you are Lord of the Rings fans, but Griemer Wormtongue from Lord of the Rings, little snitch that goes right. You know. So, yeah.
Figured that guy was trouble when I first read his name.
He was a dog.
Yeah. Oh, oh.
Mm, mm. Oh, yeah, yeah, Peter Pettigrew from Harry Potter. So,
Yeah.
David takes Abiathar into his service and promises him protection.
Harry Potter is a duel.
Yeah.
You know, talking about the good and evil, I did have this to read, kind of similar to what yours said. What can be said about the violent madness seen in a story such as this? We want to cry out in protest. Truthfully, we want God to do something about it, to intervene. After all, we've seen constant evidences of God's hand moving David toward Israel's future. We've seen God rejecting Saul and an evil spirit from God coming to plague him. Is not God in control here? But in the books of Samuel, God is at work largely through and in spite of human agency. God does not remove either David or Saul from responsibility for his own actions. Even the evil spirit that plagued Saul is an indication of his alienation from divine power and the guidance of God's spirit, but it is not in evidence as a coercive power making Saul's decisions for him. The hard truth of this terrible story is that Saul has become an evil man. He was not inherently so, or destined to be so. He is not devoid of qualities even now that arouse our sympathy, but he has become evil in the obsessive desire to maintain his hold on power. At its worst, evil cannot distinguish between friend and foe, and now Saul has turned on his allies and imagines conspiracy from his friends. The outcome is terrible to behold. The hard truth of human freedom is that God does not stay the hand of one bent on evil. God does not intervene to save the priests of Nob, whose lives are devoted to the service of the Lord. In our own century, we wish that God had stayed the hand of evil in the Holocaust, deaths of millions in the death camps, in the genocidal wars and ethnic cleansings of resurgent tribalism and nationalism, in Vietnamese villages destroyed and misbegotten efforts to save them. But God has not intervened. In our time, as in Saul's, human freedom may be used for evil. The desire to gain or maintain power over others still leads to acts of mindless violence. God does not intervene to prevent the possibilities of evil in the service of power. In 1 Samuel God is at work making clear that Israel's future promise lies with David and that Saul cannot be that future. But God in these stories works through human agency. If God is with David, it is not to supernaturally predetermine his successes. They are the product of David's gifts used in the service of God. Unfortunately, this story is centered on a man alienated from God, and God does not limit what Saul can do in the grip of evil and madness. The trust that God gives in human freedom, which is apparent in the books of Samuel, means that such freedom can be used for good or for evil. We know this is also true in our own time, for acts of terrible violence are a part of our daily news. If God is present at such times, it is not to make decisions or to determine actions for us. It is to support and enable the response of good in the face of evil. It is to provide alternatives for our future that move away from evil. In this story, David models what is required in the face of evil. David takes responsibility for what has come to pass and moves on toward God's future. The violence was Saul's, but it is David who says, I am responsible. The priests of Nob are tragically gone, but Abiathar can be sheltered, and a different kingdom from Saul's can be brought into being. The realities of evil are evident in every generation. Those who would participate in the bringing of God's future cannot be those who say, we had nothing to do with those things. God's future lies with those who, like David, say, we are responsible. It is a choosing of responsibility when the perpetrators of evil have chosen irresponsibility. As David then offered to Abiathar, we must also then offer the vision of a future free from fear, allied with light, and safe for all. Amen. What do you think about that? I think there's a lot of, that going around today of, I'm not responsible, it wasn't me, I didn't commit that violence. What I hear a lot, my ancestors never owned slaves, right? That kind of thing. Instead of, no, maybe David wasn't the one who killed the priests, but he says, I'm responsible. I will take ownership of that, and I will work to make it better. And I think that's what God is calling us to do, is to swallow our pride, to say, yeah, you know what? I didn't pull the trigger, but I'm a participant in all of this. And I can have responsibility. And I can see what God's going to do in the future and how God's going to use me to move away from that evil. Didn't mean to pull out my pulpit tonight. I'm sorry.
Well, if he hadn't gone to Nob.
Right.
And my commentary I read also observed that David must have thought it was okay to tell a fib to save his plan, because he knew he was destined to go on. What can it hurt? Well, we find out. And he took responsibility for that.
But the other point though is, at some point, the public has to get upset enough to accept David and reject Saul. And this is probably.
It sure did it, yeah.
Yeah, this is, so there was a purpose,
Mhm.
in a way.
The Old Testament is full of these scenes, as we know, as we go through them in detail. You always say to yourself, well, now, how can this be? Well, there's generally some reason why that all occurred. Doesn't fit nicely with, maybe your sensibilities, but, they were desperate times.
We mentioned earlier, we thought in David by telling it why I was protecting the priest for,
Mhm.
you know, he could say, I didn't know David was on the run,
Plausible
right?
deniability.
And so maybe it didn't occur to David that Saul would go this far,
Mm.
right? If Abimelech said, I didn't know, I thought, you know, he was serving as your son-in-law. I was believing why wouldn't I believe what he is telling me?
Mhm.
I think, at this time, it's possible David thought he could be, reconciled with Saul in
Yeah.
some manner. I mean, he didn't understand why Saul was, maybe he suspected it was because he was jealous of the fact that he was now, the people were responding to David. Saul kills thousands, David kills tens of thousands.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of hard to take when you're the king. But Saul is building his own demise.
I just remember it didn't have to go this way. Saul could have done what Jonathan did.
Mhm.
Said, okay, I recognize God's with you now. I'll let the kingdom pass to you. Didn't have to go this way.
I had my day in the sun.
You know, as we were talking about the story, just reminded me of another king that was afraid of losing power and massacred a whole bunch of children. In Jesus's time,
Mhm.
Herod.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Horrible.
All the baby boys.
And it's that same thing. It's that same just being afraid of losing your power. And, boy, it's a source of a lot of evil in this world, isn't it?
Well, those kings needed a strong woman in their life that would have shaped them up. That's what I'm told. Told at any rate.
That's funny.
Solomon had hundreds. Didn't really help him. So. There was one other thing that was interesting back in chapter 21. When David says, you know, oh no, you know, we haven't been with any women because we're on a, you know, when you go out into battle, you don't do that, right? Well, later on, when he sleeps with Bathsheba and
Yeah.
calls Uriah back and says, hey, you know, why don't you go enjoy your wife, because he had gotten her pregnant.
Mhm.
And what does Uriah say? Hey, I can't do that, not while my brothers in arms are out fighting, and you know, it's not right.
Times.
So David tries to, you know, get Uriah to break this.
And so then he has to have Uriah killed.
And then he has to have Uriah killed, yep. Mhm. Just a reminder again, I keep pulling that story because you know, throughout First Samuel, David is, I mean, he basically can do no wrong. But I gotta pull that story up just to remind us that even the great David.
Yeah.
Fell.
Oh, but he also suffered from that with the loss
Well, he
of that
did.
child.
He did.
Horrible,
He-
sad and unbelievable.
You know, I shared that story with the youth, and I think it was eye-opening for them,
Mm.
because I think when they go through like children's church and everything, we learn about the heroes of faith, and they're heroes. And so, but when they get to teenagers and they start messing up, they get down on themselves. So I pulled that story and I said, I bet there's nothing that you have ever done in your life that's worse than this. And this is David. This is David, you know, the hero, the king.
God's chosen.
Yeah. And it made them feel a lot better.
About what?
About themselves.
About themselves, you know, I think, you know,
About forgiveness.
we can get down to it. I don't know what, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, I think that's,
I'm certain they've never killed anybody, so.
A good lesson in life.
But I remember being a teenager and, but heck, even as an adult, there are things that I, you know, and I regret that I wish I hadn't done. But thank God for grace, right?
Absolutely.
But here Saul just, you know, he just keeps on digging further and further down.
oh, he's got a spear right there.
He's always holding a spear.
He must be blind as a bat. I said last week, you need to go visit Larry. My sight was terrible.
All right, anything else? Pull out?
The author,
Mm-hmm.
he ends up being the high priest until he's removed from office by Solomon, participating in a rebellion. Anyway,
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's